Thanks very much. It's great to be back. There'll be a few of you this morning that were either out at the J team this morning or weren't able to be here this morning for other reasons maybe. So I'll just say a little bit just for your benefit about the work of the Institute. It's been my great privilege to have been the Christian Institute Scotland officer for the past 13 years. I speak in churches all over Scotland and sometimes south of the border as well, and occasionally even into Wales. And it's a great privilege to be here today, morning and evening. I had a good time with you this morning, and hopefully what we have to say this evening will be helpful for you. So I've called my presentation this evening, Do Not Be Silent. I wonder if any of you know where about that comes from. I'll give you a clue. We were looking at Acts this morning. This is also from Acts. I even mentioned this morning the chapter it's from, but so as not to embarrass you with an awkward silence, I'll just let you know it is from Acts chapter 18, when Paul was in Corinth. And he was facing, oops, Daisy, is this, right, we'll see if that's going to work. It worked this morning. You maybe need to move it on for me. Hopefully it's downloaded all right. There's videos on this, so I don't know if that's frozen it at all. It's a bit of a busier PowerPoint presentation than this morning's one. But anyway, as the tech team are seeking to fix that, what the situation, just to remind you, in Acts 18, Paul had been preaching to the Jews, seeking to persuade them that the Christ was Jesus, and he was facing real hostility from the unbelieving Jews who were abusing and reviling him. And he, using the language of Ezekiel, he said, "Your blood be on your own heads," which was insult enough for them, basically saying God's judgment's coming on you because you've rejected his son, the Messiah. And I'm off to the Gentiles, so a double insult for them. And no doubt looks of real hatred on their faces. And although Paul saw a measure of blessing in the coming days, I think we can read between the lines that he really had quite troubled sleep. No doubt the images of those hate-filled Jews filling his mind and really unsettling him, because the Lord had to come and appear to him, and that was a very unusual experience for the Apostle Paul. And the words there were, "Do not be afraid, keep on speaking, do not be silent, for I am with you, and no one is going to harm you. I have many people in this city." And similar words in Isaiah 41 verse 10, "Do not be afraid, for I am with you." So Paul needed encouragement in his day. In his day, it was the Jews that had, shall we say, the cultural dominance. We see a couple of verses later that with completely trumped up charges, they were certain that Gallio, the proconsul, would find Paul guilty of basically breaking their religious laws, but thankfully Gallio knew his Roman law and said, "This has nothing to do with me," and threw the charges out. And in our own day and generation, it's not the Jews that have the kind of cultural dominance in our society. There we go. But it is indeed a different group of people. And down through the ages, the church, it seems, has often had to deal with a particular group of people. Sometimes they're religious, like the Jews. Indeed, for many centuries, in particular Reformation times onwards, it was a different kind of religion, shall we say, that was very much persecuting the church. In other parts of the world, it's a completely different religion. I'm sure you know what I'm referring to. But in our own day and generation, it is a secular religion, the secular religion of secular humanism. So I want to just set the scene this evening by just giving a little overview of what we are up against as a culture in 2024. This will be very familiar to many of you, but for others perhaps it will be fresh. But the thing is that all of us in some way or another, our families, our loved ones, cannot escape what is actually facing us as a culture, in particular in the workplace, in particular in education. And as we'll see as things go on this evening, there are challenges for every Bible-believing church at this time. So what are we up against? We're up against something called cultural hegemony I think that's how it's pronounced. It really means dominance. And this was a term that was coined by an Italian political philosopher about 100 years ago. His name was Antonio Gramsci, and he wasn't very influential in his own day, but boy, has he been influential ever since. But he was basically realizing that the Russian Revolution had happened just a few years earlier. It was very bloody. There had actually been a previous Bolshevik revolution about 12 years earlier, which was a huge amount of bloodshed. And he realized this is not the way to change the world through violent revolution. We need to basically do something a bit different. And indeed, one of his successors, the next generation of thinkers from what was called the Frankfurt School, probably the best known of these, certainly the best known quote, shall we say, by one of the Frankfurt School was by a chap called Herbert Marcuse, basically immortalized by John Lennon, "Make love, not war." That was the great slogan from the late 60s and the early 70s. Well, that was coined by Herbert Marcuse. But Max Horkheimer, who was one of the rest of that Frankfurt School, he said this: "The revolution won't happen with guns, rather it will happen incrementally. Year by year, generation by generation, we will gradually infiltrate their educational institutions and their political offices, transforming them slowly into Marxist entities as we move towards universal egalitarianism." So that was probably written in the 1930s, and really how successful has that basically huge, ambitious plan basically to win over Western societies to what has often been called neo-Marxism, rather than the original vision that Karl Marx had, which was really violent overthrow of the establishment by the proletariat, with more of an economic focus, looking for economic justice. Here, with neo-Marxism, it's very much the concept of social oppression. The oppressors, often portrayed to be Christians, against any number of minorities within society as the oppressed, requiring liberation. So, what we found is this: what has happened in our own day and generation really has been an incredible confidence that those that hold to this ideology, which really, as it developed over the post-war years, has come to be known as critical theory. And I was mentioning this morning this briefing here by Dr. Sharon James, Critical Theory, Challenging Truth and Reality. So there's lots of copies of that on my literature table at the back. Please do take a copy. So the idea basically is that they believe that science is on the side of atheists, disproved God, explaining basically how life came about. We can appeal to science, no need for God to have been involved, and indeed, whatever problems the world faces, science has the answer. Of course, science has no solution for spiritual or moral problems, which are the most profound problems, obviously, in society. But that's what's presented. Science has the answers. We have no need for God or faith or religion. And then, secondly, there's an ideological dominance from the critical theorists, and we see that presented in the media. We see that in education, that there is a new truth which, for the most part, says there's no such thing as absolute truth, which, of course, is itself an absolute. But they will actually make many claims, many contentions that they believe are unanswerable, and no one is allowed to disagree with them. Next, there is indeed, I was speaking with one lady this morning that made it clear that our own position that what is being pushed through the public sector is, well, the Equality Act says you have to do this, or the Human Rights Act says you have to do this. Well, actually, that's not the case, but certainly those that hold to this ideology believe that the law is entirely on their side and everyone has to step into line. When in fact, as I was mentioning this morning, the law is actually very much on the side of the Christian. Freedom of religion and belief, freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, very much on the side of the Christian. As we found time and time again with the court cases that we have run, in particular Asher's Baking Company that I mentioned this morning, Daniel MacArthur there on the banner at the back. And that huge case that went all the way to the Supreme Court in 2018. And in a nutshell, the decision of that case was no one can force us to change our beliefs, either what we think or what we say. We cannot be forced to think or express things that we don't believe ourselves. Massively important decision. But it's pretty unsettling to find that even the police have kind of joined the alphabet brigade, for want of another term, and that there's been really a lot of concern that many have expressed that the police are becoming politicized by this political ideology, LGBT activism, as it's often called. But just for your encouragement, even the BBC have banned their employees for taking part in Pride marches because the BBC is meant to be impartial. Believe that, if you will. But at least they're officially saying we're not allowing our staff to take part in these parades. And indeed, there was an incident a few weeks ago where Ben, I can't remember his surname, that's frequently on the couch, used to be the business guy, took over from Steph. He's now kind of on the couch more often in Breakfast News. He's a homosexual himself. He tweeted a few years ago when the question about should 5-year-olds be taught about LGBT issues, that was on Question Time. Even though everyone said yes, they should, he was appalled that the question was even allowed to be asked, tweeted about it, and had his knuckles rapped by the BBC saying you're not allowed to speak about these issues on Twitter because they're political and contentious. So it's encouraging to see that the BBC, to some extent, have got it right. Sadly, the police haven't, because the police should not be partisan, should not be supporting political campaigns. But that's the reality that we find ourselves in. Indeed, I'm going to be showing a video later on which shows just how politicized some police officers actually are. Next, there's a new morality, which is completely reversing historical Judeo-Christian morality of right and wrong. And it's very much what Isaiah says in Isaiah 5, verse 20, where he says, "Woe to you who call good evil and evil good, who put light for darkness and darkness for light." There's a kind of reversal of what was historically thought to be right is now believed to be wrong. What was historically thought to be wrong is now believed to be right. And very much in a very confident way. It's not a case of, well, this is what we believe, and you Christians, you believe what you like. No, we're right in our beliefs. You guys are hateful, you guys are bigoted. We're going to pass laws that actually force you either to be silent or to be punished if you dare to speak. But actually what we really want you to do is to believe the same as us. So it's almost like evangelism in reverse, trying to get us to change our beliefs and what we think about these issues. And then lastly, and this really is the most challenging, this is the biggest challenge, I think, the most challenging area of dominance in our culture just now, is that these activists say we are more compassionate and more loving than you Christians, because we love the underdog, we love the oppressed, we will stand up for their rights, we will value them rather than discard them the way you're doing. You don't love them at all. Well, the thing is, as we were saying this morning, all of us have our own darling besetting sin. We are all addicted to sin in one way or the other. And simply to welcome and embrace a certain section of society that is addicted to a particular type of sin that's maybe not our addiction is completely wrong for any church to do that. Jesus is in the business of saving all kinds of sinners, calling us to repentance, to turn away from the kind of lives that are taking us to lost eternity and causing us untold spiritual, psychological, and every other kind of damage, because sin never brings ultimate blessing. Jesus rescues us from our sins, both for time and eternity, brings about that transformation. So to say to anyone, well, it's okay for you to stay in your addiction. You know, we'll deal with our addiction to sin, but we're happy for you to stay in yours. It's just crazy, because the call to repentance is for everyone. There are no exceptions. God commands all men everywhere to repent. So there's a huge challenge for us, but I can maybe just share a little story from just a few years ago when I was at one of the Revival FM Christmas celebrations in the Royal Concert Hall in Glasgow, and it's a really big event, 1,500, 2,000 people there, and the appeal goes out to all sorts of churches, many of which would not preach in the way that churches like this would preach, and therefore people who were at the concert would not share our beliefs. And there was one lady came and was looking at my stand and looked a little bit quizzical, and I basically thought, well, I'll explain about the Asher's case, because most folk can get that and think that's a really good result. But again, she looked really quizzical and just looked at me and rather condescendingly said, it's not very loving, is it? And then just walked off. And it's so often the case, you think 30 seconds too late what you should have said. So I'll share now what I thought of 30 seconds after she left, which was, I said to her, well, yes, of course we are very much called to love. That's the new commandment that Jesus gives us in John 13. And of course, the most famous chapter in the Bible about love is 1 Corinthians 13. And I'd maybe whip out my phone and show her the middle section, which says, love does not rejoice at evil, but rejoices in the truth. And that's a very different kind of love. But it's true biblical love. It's the love that Jesus calls us to have, that has a moral dimension. We don't rejoice at evil. And has a doctrinal dimension as well. We rejoice at the truth. Everything that is good and right and true, we should rejoice at as Christians. Everything that is evil, that is wrong, that is false, we need to be deeply concerned about. So that's what we're up against as a culture. Just a quick overview of where we are in 2024. So the Christian Institute, just to give a little overview, that's a picture taken nearly 2 years ago of our staff. We're around about 50 members of staff, and from all over the country, indeed a few overseas. We've got a couple from Eastern Europe. We've got a Chinese lady. We've got a chap from Ghana. It's becoming increasingly international, which is absolutely fantastic. All sorts of different evangelical churches represented in the staff, which is absolutely appropriate because we do seek to have as broad an appeal to the various evangelical churches in the UK as possible. But none of us could have guessed that less than 18 months after that photograph was taken, our founder and director, Colin Hart, was suddenly and unexpectedly called home to be with the Lord just in March there. And Kieran Turner, one of our deputy directors, after much prayer by the trustees and the staff, and indeed Kieran himself, just last month agreed to take up the position of director. So I'm sure that he would appreciate your prayers for him in this important new chapter in the Institute's history. Now, we did a brief UK tour. Kieran and Sharon James, who wrote the briefing here, called War of the World Views. So many of the things that I mentioned there in that little kind of what are we up against as a culture are covered in this video that of one of the meetings that we had down south. So that's available on our website, and it'd be a really, really useful hour or so of your time just to watch that. Sharon is one of the keenest Christian thinkers of our day. She's gaining an international reputation as a speaker at women's conferences. She was at the Gospel Coalition Women's Conference in America at the start of the summer, then one in Netherlands, one in Malawi, and recently one in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. So we're so thankful for these global opportunities that Sharon is having. She is an amazing lady, very, very knowledgeable, and as I say, this briefing of hers has probably been one of the most important and popular briefings that we've had. But the video there is very well worth watching. Okay, so I'd already mentioned that those verses there in Acts 18. But what I want us to look at next really is what I'm calling a biblical apologetic for why we should be concerned about issues like abortion and assisted suicide, and why we should be concerned about what is happening within our parliaments in terms of lawmaking, in terms of politics, in terms of these important moral and ethical issues that affect the lives of the vulnerable, whether they be unborn or nearing the end of their lives, and other issues as well. So I'm just going to stand to one side here because my eyesight isn't good enough to read the text there, so I'll read it off the screen here. So God is creator of all things, is the giver of all human life, and every human being is made in his image. So well-known verses there from Psalm 139 rather, verses 13 to 16. A few other verses. Sorry, the kind of configuration isn't really quite what it should be. Some of these are maybe less well-known verses, but they teach the same truth. Job 33, verse 4, the Spirit of God has made me, and the breath of the Almighty gives me life. 1 Timothy 6, verse 13, in the middle there, Paul says, God who gives life to all things. God is the creator and the sustainer of all life. Genesis 1:27, obviously a very well-known verse. We're going through that at early chapters of Genesis at our own church, Greenview, just now. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. And then James 3, verse 9 is one of a number of New Testament verses that confirm that despite the fall, every human being is still made in the image of God, where James says there, with the tongue we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse people who are made in the likeness of God. And secondly, every life is therefore uniquely precious and purposeful, and so we are not to take another's life. I think of what God said to Cain after he had murdered his brother Abel in Genesis 4. And the Lord said, what have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. And now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. And of course, the Ten Commandments in both Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5, you shall not murder. And in Proverbs 6:17, one of the things that is an abomination to the Lord, one of the things he hates, is hands that shed innocent blood. In other words, lives that do not deserve death because they've incurred the death penalty because of a crime under the law of Moses, or they're one of Israel's enemies, etc. That's not innocent blood, but innocent blood in our context would clearly be the unborn and those towards the end of their lives. Romans 13, verse 9, I'm just singling out just one commandment there. For the commandment, you shall not murder, summed up in this word, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And in that passage, of course, Paul also says, love does no harm to its neighbor. So thirdly, this is what we can conclude from these verses. We can therefore conclude that abortion, the destruction of human embryos following experiments, assisted suicide, and euthanasia are all morally wrong. Fourthly, the role of government is to promote what is morally good and punish what is morally evil behavior, not facilitate it. Paul says, Romans 13, these well-known verses there about he is God's servant for your good. He is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. And a very similar teaching, 1 Peter 2, verse 14, governors are sent by him, that's God, to punish those who do evil and to praise those who do good. Now, it almost doesn't need to be said, but just to remind you, good and evil in Scripture is how God defines good and evil, not how society defines it. And then Psalm 82, verse 4, rescue the weak and needy, deliver them from the hand of the wicked. And fifthly, as Christians, we have a responsibility not only to pray for governments, but also to seek the well-being of our society. Now, there's well-known verses here from 1 Timothy chapter 2, but Daniel 4, first half of verse 27 there, where Daniel challenges King Nebuchadnezzar, and of course we know that Nebuchadnezzar repented. And Daniel says to him there, therefore, O king, let my counsel be acceptable to you. Break off your sins by practicing righteousness, and your iniquities by showing mercy to the oppressed. And of course, Daniel living in that Babylonian exile, very, very similar to the hostile culture that we're living in our own day and generation. And then another exilic prophecy there, Jeremiah, where God says to his people, but seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare, its shalom, you will find your welfare, your shalom. In Galatians 6, verse 10, in a New Testament context, so then, as we have opportunity, let us do good to everyone, and especially to those who are of the household of faith. Now here's a factoid you maybe aren't aware of. Did you know that universal suffrage, the fact that we all have the vote, is less than 100 years old? Yes, women got the vote in 1918, but it was the 1930s before women under 30 got the vote. So it's a very, very modern thing, this universal suffrage for all adults, male and female. And it was completely unheard of in any culture, any society in the first century when this was written. So we have a far greater opportunity to be a godly influence, to be salt and light on those whom God has put in authority, Romans 13, than all the thousands of years of previous Christians, the 2,000 years of previous Christians. So it's part of the Institute's passion to encourage Christians to say, well, we've really got an amazing opportunity to bring Christian influence into politics in a democracy where not only when we vote, but actually all year round, when we can go to our MSPs, we can go to our MP for their surgeries and raise concerns about these issues. And then, of course, the famous passage there in the Sermon on the Mount about us being the salt of the earth and the light of the world. Shouldn't lose our saltiness, shouldn't compromise, shouldn't hide our light, shouldn't be ashamed of what we believe, but indeed have that influence, just like salt has. Salt and light both have, as I often say when I'm preaching on this, a disproportionate transformative influence on their environment. You only need a little bit of salt to clear the roads in winter or to flavor your meal. You only need a little torch or a candle to dispel darkness at night or when there's a power cut. So, a few more verses. First of all, last there, point 6. As Christians, we also have a responsibility not only to do what we can to protect the weak and vulnerable who are faced with death, but to do good to them as well. So Proverbs 24:11, rescue those who are being taken away to death. Surely that refers to the unborn. Surely that also refers to the vulnerable that are going to be impacted by Leo MacArthur's assisted dying bill. Proverbs 31, verse 9, open your mouth, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and needy. Even actually the Morning Star, something we generally will not quote favorably, the Christian Institute, but they have rightly picked up that actually Leo MacArthur's bill is going to disproportionately affect the poor and the dispossessed in society, and they're absolutely right on that score. Proverbs 3:27, do not withhold good from those to whom it is due when it is in your power to do it. We have a voice. And then 1 Thessalonians 5:15, very similar to what Paul says in Galatians 6:10, although he flips it around, always seek to do good to one another and to everyone. So a great general principle for us as we think about these things. We are doing good as we seek to influence legislation. And I should say that on the assisted suicide issue, there have been umpteen attempts over the past 25 years to bring that into law. Various members' bills in the House of Lords. We had Patrick Harvey's bill, as we'll see in a minute, 9 years ago. Channel Islands, lots and lots of places. And through Christians, through doctors, through disability rights groups, people have made the case against changing the law, against bringing in assisted suicide or euthanasia, and every single time they've been successful. And politicians have listened and have realized too dangerous to go ahead with it. But we have some of the biggest challenges yet at this time. So let's look at assisted suicide in a bit more detail, what's actually happening. Now, the Institute and other similar organizations are working closely with the Care Not Killing Alliance, and it's been great to see a few of you sign their petition, which I've got on the table at the back. I'd encourage you to sign that yourselves. They're the main campaign group, and they're run by Christians that are opposing the various attempts to bring in assisted suicide throughout the UK. So I'm going to show a couple of videos. hopefully they're going to work okay. Just explaining why bringing in assisted suicide through the Holyrood Parliament, which is currently being proposed, is just going to be so dangerous.
This is the wrong intervention at the wrong time. The current situation with the NHS, with people waiting long times for treatment, with there being a huge lack of psychological assessment, and then a possible introduction of assisted suicide, is a perfect storm, and vulnerable patients will be very badly affected.
People are jumping to a solution that questions the law. What we need to do instead is to question the care.
It's very common to feel demoralized and feel in despair and be in anguish, and most often that's a cry for help. Our response has been to come alongside and provide care and support and help people understand what's important to them and what their options are. And with time, that desire to die, as we call it, goes away, most often within 10 to 14 days.
The difference is once you legalize euthanasia and you're expressing this feeling of maybe I'd rather be dead, that becomes a request to be killed. So instead of receiving the help you need to live until you die, you receive the death that you never actually thought you'd be ever asking for.
This will only be used exceptionally. Well, we're probably at 16,000 deaths last year. We were told less than 100 requests per year in the province of Quebec. My province has 400 deaths a month. And we're probably at over 60,000 deaths since its inception in 2016.
And it was always, we'll do it better. Don't worry about Poland and Belgium. Yes, they've got problems, they've expanded, but we won't let that happen. So this is sort of naive kind of, we'll do it properly. And so that's one of the things which I think people need to be disabused of, is that, humans behave in particular ways because of key principles that are driving them, and a whole range of things that are relatively common to humanity. So if you do it in one place, it's going to look similar elsewhere.
Well, it's a sobering truth that of all of us here this evening, more than half of us, unless the Lord returns, will die of a terminal illness like cancer. And all of us, because of that statistic, will have a very close loved one who will die of a terminal illness, even if we don't. So this proposed legislation is going to affect every single family in this room, every single family in any church that I speak in. So we really have got to make the case to the politicians that it's never the right time. And we need to persuade them, and particularly the younger ones, that probably just think, well, of course we should all have the right to choose how and when we die. What's not to like about that? The concerns are very, very profound, and indeed, many of those on that video are not Christians, but they can see from their own research, from their own professional perspective. The lady from Canada there, Leonie Herx, is a palliative care academic in Canada. And the reason there's so many from Canada is because it's got one of the worst pieces of legislation passed just 2016, but you can see from what was said there just how much it has just kind of snowballed since then, and there's no reason why that won't also happen if it's passed through the Holyrood Parliament. Okay, so what is actually happening just now? Well, Liam MacArthur, who is the Airdrie MSP, tabled a bill which we've been waiting a long time for, but he's known there's been lots of problems with it, but he finally launched it in the end of March this year. There was a public consultation. Those of you who are on our mailing list will no doubt have responded to that. That ended on the 16th of August, and we're thinking that likely towards the end of the year, evidence will be taken on the bill with a view probably to what's called a stage 1 vote at some point in maybe February or March next year. And I'm hoping that we'll maybe have a big Scotland tour for the Christian Institute around that time, just to highlight the importance of us all getting in touch with our MSPs as that crucial stage 1 vote is made. Now, we've been very encouraged that what happens is when public bodies respond to that kind of public consultation, their responses become public. I think actually with this members' rule, everyone's response went public, but you could be anonymous if you're an individual, but not if you're a big public body like my former governing body when I was a solicitor of the Law Society of Scotland. But they've said some really helpful things here, where they said we have serious concerns about the competence of this bill in relation to the European Convention on Human Rights. So they're kind of sending a hint to groups like Care Not Killing. There might well be a legal challenge under right to life for this legislation. And they say the bill's provisions are not fit for purpose around key questions. So that's really encouraging to hear such an influential body that have to be neutral on the principle, but can certainly be very critical on the detail of the proposed bill. And they've highlighted many, many weaknesses in it. Now, 9 years ago, when this was last debated by the Scottish Parliament, I was there in the public gallery for the stage 1 vote, and it was fantastic to hear not only all the Christian MSPs, but many others talk a lot of common sense. And as a result of these excellent speeches, his bill was defeated by 82 votes to 36. So never let it be said that politicians will not listen to good arguments and good reasons for not going ahead with legislation. They certainly did back in 2015. But a lot of these politicians have either retired or moved on to other careers, and we've got a raft of new young ones that need to be told these arguments again and again in these coming weeks and months. So I'm just going to play another video just now, just to finish this section. It's again put together by Care Not Killing, and what it does is it imagines, if the law is passed next year, what is likely to happen over the next 10 years. And every single scenario in this video is a reality somewhere else in the world at present, where the law has allowed either assisted suicide or euthanasia. So let's watch this video. It just finished there, I think. Oh, sorry. Well, very sobering, but we've been there before, and through much prayer and through engaging with the politicians, we've been able to persuade them not to go ahead. And indeed, just today we saw a very encouraging comment from Wes Streeting, who is slated perhaps to be the next Labour leader after Keir Starmer at some point in the future, doing an excellent article saying that now is not the time for assisted suicide. So that's really encouraging to hear, because there is a bill from the former Lord Chancellor, Lord Falconer, going through the House of Lords just now. And that would only affect England and Wales, but still we're having to kind of resist this on so many fronts, Isle of Man, Jersey as well. Anyway, so please do sign the Care Not Killing petition. Please put your email address and tick the box at the end so that you'll get the fullest picture from Care Not Killing. The Christian Institute also, and we've got is opposing assisted suicide. We've got our briefing here on it. Please take that away with you as well. Okay, so next point I want to mention is, or I touched on briefly this morning, the conversion practices ban. And there's been some interesting developments with that lately, but again, we've got a video from one of my good friends and colleagues who lives whose parents live not a million miles away from here in South Lanarkshire. David's been with us for the last couple of years, and he's doing the voiceover for this video.
The Scottish Government says it wants to ban practices that seek to change someone's sexual orientation or gender identity. Conversion therapy is a wide umbrella term chosen by LGBT activists. It covers abusive practices by quack medical practitioners and charlatan preachers, which are illegal already. So why are they demanding a new law? The campaigners want to go much further. They say any form of persuading someone to change their sexual behaviour or gender identity should be illegal. They are calling for a broad law that outlaws prayer, preaching, and pastoral care if it doesn't affirm LGBT ideology. They want to criminalise encouraging someone to embrace the Bible's teaching on marriage and sexuality. Such a law would cover everyone, including church leaders and Christian parents. This threatens the ordinary work of churches. Proclaiming forgiveness for sin and calling people to repentance is at risk. We must stand up for the freedom to share the gospel with all people, including those who are gay or transgender. It shouldn't be illegal for Christians to teach their faith or for people to pray for their friends or family.
So just to recap there, what David was saying was that the proposals are to criminalise any prayer, preaching, pastoral care. And although the video says Christian parents, actually any parent that believes in biological reality, that their sons are boys, their girls are daughters, and they can't change, and that I think would probably encompass the vast majority of ordinary Scottish parents, would all face potential prosecution, indeed having their children perhaps even taken away from them. So we know that we're not exaggerating, we're not scaremongering here, because the Australian state of Victoria already has such legislation, and politicians and activists are saying that that is the gold standard. That's exactly the legislation, word for word, that we want to have here in Scotland. So we've got a little briefing about what the law in Victoria, Australia is all about there on the table. We've also got one from we are running the Let Us Pray campaign. We had a very successful conference, Scottish conference at Newton Mearns Baptist in February. 400 folk came. It was the best attended Christian Institute organised event ever in Scotland. So there's a briefing there about conversion therapy and free speech. And we have our own one as well, criminalising prayer and parenting. So as we often do when legislation that we believe is going to be completely contrary to human rights law is being proposed, we often will go to our good friend Aidan O'Neill, who is one of the human rights law experts in the country, and in particular, legal challenges to the Supreme Court. So he has done a 46-page opinion critiquing the proposals from the Scottish Government, and he's described it as jellyfish legislation, impossible to grasp, with a sting in its tail, a maximum jail sentence of 7 years. Now, like Paul Mullen, I used to be, well, he still is, of course, a criminal defence lawyer, far better than I ever was, but those are the kind of jail sentences that you give out to rapists and drug dealers and armed robbers. So really, really sinister what is actually being proposed here. Now, I should really get I'll just put that back in a minute. I should have put a new slide up because, as you may have heard already this week, what John Swinney has decided to do is, because there's a new government in Westminster that ideologically would be much more on the same page with the SNP than the Conservatives. So what the SNP are going to do is to give Keir Starmer and the Labour Party the opportunity to bring out Westminster legislation, which, through something called a Sewell motion, Holyrood can agree to. If the Holyrood Parliament agrees to everything in a Westminster bill, then it can apply in Scotland as well. So that's going to take some time, but it's definitely it was in the King's Speech, as you may remember, for just a few weeks ago. So there is going to be a draft bill that's going to be out for a public consultation, and that's going to be all the more important for us to respond to that, because the SNP are basically giving a nod to Labour. If we like your legislation, we will basically agree to it applying in Scotland. So another opportunity for us, probably early next year, to respond to a public consultation and basically to have our say. Now, we do believe that it is entirely possible that what the Westminster government will do is decide that it's just going to be too difficult to bring it in. Sweden has done that. The Republic of Ireland has done that. They know the human rights issues are such that if they pass a law, it can just be challenged successfully in the courts, something Airdrie Ebenezer has done with the named person legislation. And if you don't remember that, I'm sure you remember when Boris Johnson tried to prorogue Parliament, and that got overturned in the Supreme Court. Well, guess which lawyer it was that did that? Airdrie Ebenezer. So he is really the best of the best. So he's going to be a busy man, I'm sure, over the next wee while, probably giving us further opinions, in particular as Westminster put their own proposals forward, which seem likely to be very similar to what Holyrood has been proposing. So I'll just finish with, as I mentioned earlier, one of our legal cases, and indeed it is one from just along the road from Glasgow City Centre. Our Legal Defence Fund has been going for some 17 or 18 years, where we represent Christians that get into difficulties because of their faith, simply and reasonably sharing their faith perhaps in the workplace or in some public place, not just street preachers, but maybe just speaking about their faith openly, maybe even on social media, and we will come in and represent them. And as I say, the law is very much on the side of the Christian, as you'll see from this video I'm just about to play.
On the 5th of January 2022, preacher Angus Cameron was arrested in Glasgow. Prior to the arrest, Angus had spoken with another police officer who dealt with the situation reasonably and lawfully.
I understand all you're wanting to do is put your point across, and you're taking quotes at the Bible, and I'm not going to challenge you on that.
But later, another PC arrived to question Angus and inform him of a complaint that he had made homophobic comments. She would not say what these comments were, nor was she interested in hearing from any other witnesses.
So we've had a complaint about some of the comments that you've been making, which have offended certain people, about them being homophobic, which is obviously an offence.
I would like you to tell me what homophobic comments I'm supposed to have said.
I will, but I'm not going to repeat that right now in the public. We're now investigating a crime that's been committed.
Oh, a crime, right?
Yes, essentially a breach of the peace with homophobic aggravation.
We're preaching direct from the scriptures.
Right, but see, as much as you're preaching from the scriptures, people are still offended by that.
Surely it's up to you to investigate whether there's a crime has taken place, rather than just taking a complaint and taking the remarks that has been made by the person who made the complaint, taking them as gospel truth. Surely you should be seeking to see if there's witnesses.
Immediately after having his details taken, Angus was arrested. At least 5 officers appear to have been involved.
Just step back for me. Can I just ask you to step back as well, please, sir? Right.
They'll hate you on account of my name, Jesus said.
I'll just put it in his property then, if that's okay, just because I don't know.
After he was released, PC Campbell later phoned Angus to update him on the case. Confusion remained over whether he was charged or not, and it was officially recorded that he had committed a non-crime hate incident.
What has happened is he's put on what's called a hate incident report.
You have received an allegation of a crime And what you have done is, rather than investigate fully that allegation, you have taken one side of an allegation and decided to have it recorded that I committed a hate incident. What about those witnesses that heard exactly what I said?
Well, because it's not going, that would be something that the court would want to, they would want all sides of the story. However, that would be something that they would do for the defence side of things, but because it's not going to court, we're not going down that route.
Okay, so
people saying what's happened, they've been offended by it, and that's enough for the crime to be complete.
I thought you told me that I had been charged.
Yes, on the basis that it was going to be subject to the report, and I said I would phone you back and just clarify that. So that's why I'm phoning just now to say that what we've left is a report.
Can you clarify and confirm to me that those charges have now been dropped?
It's not, well, no, they've not been dropped in the sense of what I said. So what I couldn't do in the van is I couldn't have not charged you to then try and then come and charge you at a later date once I'd checked what I was going to check. So what I'd done at the time was I charged you and said, right, okay, that as it stands just now, until I go and double check, and I said I would give you a phone to confirm what had happened. However, when I came back to the office, I've checked a few things, I've spoken to the sergeants, etc., and we've kind of decided that it's going on as a hate incident as opposed to being charged.
Are there still charges pending against me?
No.
No. So, in other words, the charges against me have been dropped?
In terms of going to the fiscal, yes, but it's still being recorded as such.
So, in other words, then, there's a record of a hate incident against my name.
Angus later sent a data subject access request to Police Scotland. As a result, police documentation revealed that the police accepted that at no point had Angus used offensive language or broken the law. However, the police defended their arrest of Angus and the recording of a hate incident against him. So, with the support of the Christian Institute, Angus sued Police Scotland. His legal action was successfully settled out of court. The police paid him £5,500 in compensation for the 70 minutes of unlawful detention. They have also paid £9,400 in legal costs. And they deleted the hate incident recorded against his name. If you would like to support the Christian Institute's legal work, go to the.ci/donate-LDF.
Well, we give thanks to God for a just outcome to that whole matter, but obviously very stressful for Angus and indeed his wife and family. So if you'd like to be kept informed about all the matters I've been speaking about this evening and many more, I've not even had a chance to mention the work we do on education, Equipped for Equality. If you have children or grandchildren at school age, or if you're still at school yourself, as I see a few of you are, this is a really good briefing to get there, just to know what your rights are and also what should and shouldn't be taught in schools. I meant another briefing just from, as I did mention this morning, this one on Gnosticism. You might think, well, it's not a little bit esoteric. Well, actually, radical gender ideology, transgenderism, is just a modern expression of the ancient heresy of Gnosticism that was around even in the Apostle John's day. That's what's addressed very much in the first chapter of John's Gospel, and many commentators think 1 John and Colossians, it's Gnostic heresy that's being dealt with there. It's the oldest heresy that's never gone away down through the centuries, and in our own day and generation, it's the transgender agenda that is the modern expression of Gnosticism. So that one and Sharon James's probably the two best briefings that we have that really lift the lid on all that's happening in our culture today. But please do, it's great to see a number of you have signed up already. Please do take a minute. If it's not on a pew near you, then we've got some extra cards on the literature table. If you sign up to get our mailing, that's absolutely fantastic. As I said this morning, if you'd rather only get our stuff by email, that's fine too, but please just put your postcode as well so we know that you're living in Scotland and we can give you stuff that's relevant to the Scottish context. Well, thank you very much indeed for your time. I'm sorry I've overrun a wee bit, but I don't know who's going to close the meeting tonight. But unless Can I ask if anyone's got any burning questions anyone wants to ask? I won't take too long with this because I'm conscious of the time. If anyone has a burning question, I'll maybe try and answer it just now. Well, I mean, to give an example there with the police officer, I mean, she just didn't understand the law. You can ask Paul this. Being offended is not a crime. They're saying that, if people are offended by preaching, that's completed a breach of the peace. No, it hasn't. It was the first officer that understood the law. So we've got a big job to do to try and educate, a number of police officers as to what the law actually is. But you're right that there is a lot of misinformation, misunderstanding about these matters, what the law actually says in terms of LGBT rights, and what the law says in terms of the rights that we have as Christians. Yeah. Knowing your Bible, absolutely, very important. That's the most important thing. Yeah.
Do you know how many believer MSPs there are in Parliament just now?
Well, we certainly know of 4. Murdo Fraser, who's standing obviously for the Conservative leadership. Kate Forbes, who's Deputy First Minister. So how interesting would that be, having 2 Christians that are very, very prominent in Scottish politics, in particular perhaps after the 2026 election, where things could change a bit there. But we'll not make any predictions to that end. John Mason, who will be standing down at the 2026 election, obviously he's got into a bit of hot water with his MSPs, but he's probably the most bold politician. Obviously, he was the only MSP to vote against the buffer zones. I've seen him say that, Jesus is the only way to God, publicly stating his opposition to abortion. I think he's the only Christian MSP that actually has done that. So John, who of course is MSP not too far away from here for Glasgow, Shettleston, and then Jeremy Balfour, another Conservative there. So he, as a disabled MSP, has a particularly strong voice for the assisted suicide issue. There are many other MSPs that we work with too, that although they are not evangelical Christians, they will be very supportive of us on perhaps assisted suicide or on matters of freedom of speech and freedom of conscience. We find that, for example, on the transgender issue, you have a lot of feminist MSPs, even within the SNP and Labour, that would be very, very opposed. Ash Regan is the most obvious example, of course she's with Alba now. But it shows just one person can have a huge influence. It was basically her refusal to support Hamza Yusuf in the vote of no confidence that basically brought him down. So that's a great example of how just one person can make a huge difference. So we anticipate a pretty close vote on the assisted suicide matter, but it is winnable, and as we've seen in the past, politicians will listen to arguments, and you do need to put the arguments to them, because that is what won the day 9 years ago, and that's what needs to win the day this time as well.
Is there any papers or anything made up by yourselves to safeguard churches? Like of someone came in here and said that same-sex marriage, if we want to be married in this church, or we say something from the platform against LGBT. Is there any guidance from yourself?
Well, we're actually working on something just now that's basically, although it's for street preachers, it would apply for any preacher in a church, and it's basically called a Street Preachers Charter. So we're actually working on that as we speak, but we've got a couple of briefings there that explain the work of the Legal Defence Fund, and indeed one of the things I'm going to be pushing for is to have a briefing that's available in England that explains the law in England about these matters. I think really we need to have it in Scotland as well. But basically, yes, we do have good rights in law under the Human Rights Act, under the Equality Act. We still have great freedom of speech, so long as we're sticking to the scriptures, so long as we're not being mean and hateful and aggressive in the way that we would expound the scriptures. The law is completely on our side. It doesn't prevent us from having to go through the process of the likes of Angus Cameron there, but the law is firmly on the side of the Christian in relation to all these matters for now.